Thanks for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. Canada's fertility rate, the rate at which babies are born, continues to plummet. Here to talk about it is Cara. She is a journalist and the co-host of the Missing Middle podcast. Welcome to Boom and Bust.
Thanks so much for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. First, I guess, how bad is it? How bad is Canada's fertility rate?
It is very bad. We are considered ultra low. We have a fertility rate of 1.25 children per woman, and that's like it's in some of the lowest countries. You know, we hear about South Korea, we hear about Japan. Like we're as bad as they are at this point.
And when did this start to be that poor a fertility? If we can say poor, I mean, I know it's all based on choices, and we are going to talk about that, but that low a fertility rate, right? When did this start to happen?
Well, we've been seeing a drop for decades, but the drop in Canada has been speeding up. It's been faster than a lot of other countries. Like if you look back a couple decades, you would have looked at Germany and said, like, they're an example of a country that is a really low fertility rate. We got to look at what they're doing and make sure we don't do that because like that's a big problem. And now we have surpassed them. So there's a lot of things that impact the fertility rate, but at the same time, like Canada is one of those ones where it's falling faster than some other places. It's a really tough issue to solve, but even though a lot of other countries, haven't been able to get it up very much, I would
Right.
like to see us stop falling that quickly.
So you've said, because you, I think on your podcast have talked about this a little bit, you said that this isn't a choice issue. So what is it then? If people aren't choosing to have fewer children, uh, or if they are choosing that, why is that happening?
The way that we think about it is people are making choices based on what's available to them. So, my colleague Mike Moffat described it as, he likes to take road trips. When the price of gas goes up, he's taking fewer road trips. Is that because he's choosing to take fewer road trips, or is he responding to the conditions? And so, when I've talked about fertility rates in the past and the idea that people aren't having as many kids as they would otherwise like to, or that they would say they would otherwise like to, at least, a lot of people will respond and say, this is just women's choices. When women had the choice to get into the workforce and not have as many kids, when birth control became a thing and you didn't have to have a kid, all of a sudden people chose not to. And that's all that's happening. And you're not going to change the culture because that's our culture. And I disagree with that because when you speak to women, when StatsCan has some information about this, Cardis did some research on this and was looking at like how many kids do women say they want and how many do they actually have, the number, there's a gap there. And
Mhm.
so what I would like to see is us to make some policy changes and to try to like ideally change some of our culture, which is a big ask, but I think we should
Mhm.
need to start there to try to get people to be able to have the conditions where they're able to have the number of kids that they actually want to have. Right now, if you ask a woman in their 20s, StatsCan says they say they want on average 2.2 kids. That's very different from what's actually happening.
And I think this is the key point that women do want to have more kids than is happening. And let's talk about that. Is it the purely economic factors versus cultural? What is it?
There's so many different factors, but I'm a big subscriber to the housing theory of everything. I think if you fix housing, a lot of this goes away because I mean, I just talk to people who are my age. I'm 37 years old. I have two kids. So a lot of my friends are in the age where they're having kids, having a second kid, deciding if they can afford to. And a lot of times they're talking about, well, I don't know if I can afford it. If you're in a one bedroom apartment, you're probably not going to have more than one kid, if any. If you're in a two
Mhm.
bedroom apartment, the going from one kid to two kids is very difficult because you just look at core housing need and how many rooms you need per person. Like if you have two kids of one boy, one girl, like eventually they need their own room. You don't have a big enough space. And then it gets really bad when you start trying to make the leap to three kids because, then you need, it's harder to get around. It's
Right.
really expensive to have kids. I think that housing though is it's the biggest line item on most people's budgets. So if we can solve housing and get people into family size homes, which we don't have enough of these in Canada, we're not building them enough. There
Mhm.
isn't the policy available that makes it easy to build them. I think if we get there, we'll start seeing a big change because that's a big bottleneck. And I mean, just talk to people who are thinking of having kids. That always comes up about the space needed.
No, absolutely, and I think that is a subset of the economic factors. Housing is a big one. So we want to talk about remedies for this situation. I think you're What you've just said is obviously housing, but let's dig a little bit deeper. We're going to take a brief break with our guests. We'll be back with Cara Stern after these important messages. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Cara Stern. She is a journalist and the co host of the Missing Middle podcast. Cara, we're just talking about the low fertility rate here in Canada, and you've identified lack of affordable housing or proper housing that can sustain, having more members of the family, having more children. I consider that kind of economy based, I guess, in the sense of people's affordability of proper housing and so on. So, what do you see just more generally, but housing, but even more generally than that? What do you see as the remedies? What's going to help increase the fertility rate? That is to say, increase the ability of parents to have the number of kids that they would desire to have under normal circumstances.
So there's so many different areas, so I'll pick a couple to talk about, but none of them have like one quick fix. Unfortunately, there's a big list of them. One thing I think about is credentialism. We need people to stay in school longer to get jobs, and I think that's created a problem where people they're in school trying to build their career. They're not thinking about settling down and having a family until they feel like they're financially stable enough, that their job is steady enough. When you go on mat leave, you're taking off time off of work, and that definitely, no matter how you slice it, it's going to affect your career, no matter what career you're in.
Hmm.
And that's something that is really difficult. So I would like to see if we can start thinking about like how much do you need to go to school for different careers, because if you're not starting your career until 25, by the time you feel stable enough to have a kid, like you're pushing it later and later. We know that as people are pushing it later, that makes it more difficult to have kids. Way more people are using fertility treatments now than they used to, and it tends to be in the age 35 and older. People are starting to have kids later. If you look at that over time, like it's gone up and up and up. I believe in some provinces, it's in Ontario and BC, we are over 30 years old for the age of the first kid. And
Hmm.
it's like the longer you wait to have kids, the harder it's going to be. I keep thinking about like the idea of how we're delaying lots of milestones, home ownership, like that's starting later. And when you start your job is starting later. And that's all well and good. Like we can do that. People are living longer, but unfortunately the biology is there. We
Hmm.
don't have the option to wait until your 40s. As much as we see celebrities and things having kids in their 40s, it's not a good plan for most people.
Right, right. Credentialism is that's a very interesting aspect of this, and I've noticed it too. And I think there are certain jurisdictions that are experimenting with lowering the credentials required to do a certain job. Like, let's face it, you don't need two post secondary degrees to do certain jobs, but that seems to be where our society has gone. Is that something that you've noticed as well?
For sure. Yeah. We've required more and more for jobs that never needed it. And then there's the question of, is that reasonable? Should we rethink that? Because not only is it time lost, it's money lost. You go to school, you're paying tons of money, you
Hmm.
graduate, you have a ton of debt, and all of a sudden you're working, but you're paying so much of your income towards your house. You're paying so much of your income towards your groceries, and then there's student debt on top of it. So it takes longer and longer to build the savings you need in order to feel financially stable to have kids. And it's great that it's great that people are waiting till they're feeling financially stable to have kids. That's really important, and I understand that that's why a lot of people wait until their 30s. That's why I waited until I was in my 30s when I felt like ready to have kids. But it's a real problem that is necessary. It shouldn't be necessary for us to take so much schooling to do jobs that never required it in the past and probably don't need it at this point.
So, Kara, other countries have the same problem, right? So, is there a good way to react to this problem and a poor way, or what has your research shown about this?
There's lots of different ways countries have tried to tackle it. No one has fully reversed it. So that is one thing to put out there. And I'm hoping to do with Mike Moffat at the Missing a Mill Initiative. We'd like to do some more research into this to find out like what are things we can do now in Canada. But we can see things that like the University of Toronto did a study where they talked about how the role of housing prices, and they attributed half of the number of babies that the decline in America, I guess because America uses more, collects data much better than Canada does. So I'm guessing that's why they looked there. But they attributed half of that to housing, of the number of kids that are not born anymore, that
Mhm.
otherwise would be in the previous generation. Um, there's things like we need to improve employment for young people. Like the employment rate is brutal for young people right
Right,
now. So that
right.
it just all this contributes to taking longer and longer for them to start their careers.
I think that's an important point, and obviously we're going to keep delving into this a little bit. We're going to take another commercial break, though. Cara Stern is joining us. She's a journalist and the co-host of the Missing Middle podcast. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. My guest is Cara Stern. She is a journalist and the co-host of the Missing Middle podcast. Cara, we were talking about other countries maybe having some success, at least increasing fertility rates. Please continue with your thoughts on this matter.
A lot of them that have had some success tend to be countries that have more stronger sense of community, whether that comes from religious organizations or just some sense of community. I think that's something that we are losing a lot of in Canada. If you look at some rates of how lonely young people are,
Mm.
it's really bad for especially in the 20s, that kind of that age. There's a lot of people who are facing a lot of isolation, and I think that there's just like not this sense of community. And so much of having a kid and the idea of being able to raise a kid, it's so much easier if you have community support. People always talk about how, like, it takes a village to raise a child, and I believe that's true. I totally believe that if you can have your parents involved or cousins or anyone in your life who's willing to help out, it makes life so much easier. I'm
Mhm.
just going to bring it back to housing for a second, because one of the problems is people keep having to move to different provinces, cities, countries to be able to afford a home. And that means you're losing your community. So that's why I think it's so important to build homes where people are living, like near
Right.
where people's families are. But I think if you have a sense of community, it makes it much easier. And I'd like to see more opportunities for these kinds of places for young people to connect and get to know each other, because right now, you go home, you go to your office, you sometimes like you'll take transit, commute wherever you're going. We don't have a lot of places in our cities where people can gather
Mm.
for free, ideally, or inexpensively, and get to know each other at this point. And I think isolation definitely has seemed to be playing a role in it.
And of course, many people, younger people in particular, their life is online. It's not necessarily as much person to person as it used to be. So is that part of the equation as well, that we're in this online world? Is that part of the issue?
Absolutely. And I know that that has contributed, or a lot of people think that has contributed to a sense of lower sense of happiness. And I think that you need some happiness and hopefulness for the future for deciding to bring a child into it. But also, we know that social media really brings that, like, keeping up with the Joneses on steroids there. Like, you get to see what everyone's doing there. And there's studies to back this up, that people think about, like, what do you need to feel ready to have a child? And what they feel they need has increased a lot because of what they're seeing online. Like, there's so many of these
Okay.
like momfluencers and people who try to show you, like, this is what it means to be a good parent, and it's a lot of time and money that a lot of people, it scares them.
So, and are they then listening more to that kind of Instagram post versus uh, their experiences as a child growing up with the parents? Is that what's happening then?
I think it's a bit like there's a bit of a change in how people are thinking about parenting. Like, yes, you have your own experiences, but a lot of the way that people grew up, like, it's just not applicable to how people do it now. People are parenting in very different ways. There's a lot more like, oh, this is how our parents did it. This is how we do it. I catch myself all the time talking to my mom and saying, "No, this is how we do it. We don't use these words anymore." And I know that it's like that's not great. Like, really, when you have a village, you have to accept the villagers for who they
Yeah.
are and what they're able to contribute. So I always try to tell myself and other people, like, accept whatever help you can get, even if it's not your ideal way of parenting. But I think that people do look online and they see, like, there's so much out there that says it makes people think you can kind of like hack parenting. You can crack the code. If you just do these things, say these things, your kids will be mentally well, that they'll be educated, that they'll be calm. And it's just like, it's not that easy. And I think you learn fairly quickly when you actually have a kid that you can't follow a manual. Your kid is not going to be that way
Yeah,
and not
yeah,
going to make it easy to do that. But I think that people feel that there is. And so there's a lot of pressure. The way I think of it is it feels like almost like the job description of being a parent has changed for this generation with social
interesting.
media than it used to.
Yeah, no, very interesting. So, do you think that there's a realization now in Canada that this is a problem that has to be fixed? Are you getting that sense as a reaction to what you've been talking about?
I think some people are feeling that. I've started talking about this for like a few months now. I've been trying to make a bit of noise about this because this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and it's come up through housing, but I haven't like been able to delve into it until quite recently. And people are responding to it. There are people who are interested in like why this is happening. I appreciate you wanting to talk about this because I think it's something that more people need to
Mhm.
hear about. I don't know that there's this sense of like that there's anything that politicians can do, that there's any policy solutions, or that there's anything that can really be done. I think a lot of people
Mhm.
throw their hands up in the air and go, that's what people want. Like people can choose to have a family, and if they don't, okay. And I don't think people realize that it's bad for our economy, but it's also
Right.
bad for our culture if you're raising a generation of people who feel like they are out of options, that they cannot have a
Yeah.
kid even if they want to.
Right. Right. Cara, we're going to take another brief break. We'll be back with you after these commercial messages. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Cara Stern. She is a journalist and the co host of the Missing Middle podcast. Cara, just trying to get a sense of what's working, what's not working. I believe you've written that, affordable childcare, which intuitively should be part of the solution, it really hasn't made a dent. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, what I was looking at was a study that was comparing in Quebec when they implemented their childcare system. I think the one federally is too new for us to know the results. But what they found was that when that was implemented there, people who were in their 20s started having kids more. But people who were in their 30s and already had a kid actually had fewer kids than they expected because I think that they realized, oh, I can go back to work. And they realized the opportunity cost of having a kid was very high. And so, especially if you're in your career at a point where you're trying to build it that way, and that was kind of counterintuitive. I thought
Mm.
that that would make a difference, and it didn't. I do wonder, of course, that in Quebec, I don't know how relevant it is to nowadays, where, when I was thinking of having a second kid, I looked at the numbers for the cost of housing, cost of childcare, and I was like, well, if that doesn't work, guess I'm not having a second kid. And then the childcare plan kicked in, and I went, ooh, I can make this work. Better, let's do this.
Mhm.
And so I don't actually know. I know that when I talk to people, they seem to think that that does make a difference. Hear my story reflected in other people as well. So I don't know whether we'll see something different federally, because of course Quebec in the late 90s is a different situation, especially cost of living compared to nowadays in most of the rest of the country.
Indeed, indeed. So those are still factors at play. So I come back to the issue, about changing mass behavior, and you've already referred to this. We're in this new normal now. How realistic is it to change not just a few people's minds on this, but having enough that it'll make it statistically relevant?
I think we need to really figure out what it is that's holding people back, like talk to people. We need some more qualitative research out there that will figure out exactly why people say they aren't having kids. Of course, what people say and do sometimes aren't the same things, but that would really help. And the way I think of it is like there's a lot of people who don't want to have kids, and that's totally fine. But I think that there's a lot of people who do want to have kids who are not able to. So I think let's try to attack it from all the policy solutions we can. And then there's the cultural change, which is very hard. But one thing that I think about is the way that we talk about parenting. It's always like I've always grown up hearing about parenting as like it's such a slog, it's such a challenge. You get no sleep and you'll get real freedom in 18 years. And I think that we should try to talk a little bit more about the joys of it as well, because those are just as real as the sleepless nights.
Yeah,
It gives
and
really a sense of meaning.
yeah, exactly. And this is just an observation, but when you look at how culture is reflected back to us, Hollywood films or what have you, aside from Hallmark movies, it's hard to get a sense that parenting is a good idea, right?
Yeah, it's always seen as like I think there was a show, Children Ruin Everything. And that's kind of the message I feel like I got growing up. And then also, I feel like I grew up with the world's overpopulated. And so it's actually irresponsible to have too many kids. And so, you as a responsible citizen, if you want to be good for this world, have fewer kids. And now we're seeing that narrative change and say, you know what, we're having a population collapse. This is actually a big problem and we need more kids. And I think that that's going to take a long time to change that culture. But this, we can start with like focusing on some of the positive of having kids. I'm really happy that we got to a place where people don't feel they have to. That
Mhm.
people who don't want to have kids and know them they themselves wouldn't be good parents don't bring a kid into this world because obviously that would be absolutely horrible. So it's nice that we've changed the culture enough, but now I think we need to remind people of why it's such a wonderful thing and
Right.
what it will bring to their own lives. It's not just about the sacrifices, you gain so much out of it.
No, exactly. And just on, I know we've just got a few seconds left, but on population collapse, that's actually worse for the environment than having a robust population because the per unit cost of saving the environment goes way up. Uh,
Mm, yeah.
your thoughts on that, maybe?
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot more to look into on that, but I think that like that makes a lot of sense. I've heard that argument before, and it's something that I hope that we'll be covering on our podcast for sure as well. And I'd be happy to come back and talk more about it if you'd like.
Well, certainly, I'm glad that you're saying that more research has to be done. I agree with that as well. But thank you for raising these issues. I think it's very important for our society. Cara Stern, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.